Hi everyone, welcome. We're checking in today on a pair of European nightcrawler worm bins in which there's been an interesting little experiment going on with these worms. Trying to compost some wool fabric, but before we get started, just a quick recap of what we saw last time in here. I do remember us seeing lots and lots of flying insects, many of them paired up and mating right there in front of our eyes. So we attempted to treat the system with some of my Mosquito dunks, which I just take one of these Mosquito dunks donuts and grind it up, and then I apply it as sort of a dry substance. And I got to admit, I did spot a couple flying insects when I first came in here, but I was really expecting a swarm, much like we saw during the last check-in 15 days ago. But it's interesting. In this corner of bin number 1, and then over there, in that corner of bin number 2, it seems like we got a couple little helpers here. So let's get a closer look at our bin number 1 helper here. He's a pretty little guy. And then look over here, bin number 2, the bin number 2 guy, he's hiding. He doesn't want to show off, but he's probably just as pretty. And I'm wondering if it could be because of those two little spiders that we're not seeing any flying insects, or at least not as many as we saw last time. I mean, one thing that definitely seemed to trigger a lot of flying insect activity last time was me just moving these pieces of cardboard, probably stuff that the flying insects like hiding in. And right there I see, yep, they're probably hiding down within the these little openings in the corrugated cardboard. So maybe it's time to put some better use to that cardboard. So my idea was to sprinkle in some more, but it does seem like the problem has subsided significantly. Oops, uh-oh, I just disturbed our little friend over here, you know. Why don't we try to conduct this check-in in such a way that we don't disturb our helper spider friends. And I'm not going to be watching them the entire time we're here. We'll just go about our attempt at feeding these systems really quick, and hopefully we can do so in such a way that we don't scare away our friends. Because what I wanted to do was sort of follow suit with what we did last time, which was to not disturb the system itself, which is hidden down below the plastic box in which we contained our wool fabric experiment. So I'm already getting some material on even my clean hand here. So before we get all dirty, let me just quickly update you on what's going on here. So these systems, as you can see in line number 2, are only 59 days of age, but the wool fabric composting experiment started 277 days ago when these worms used to live in their previous home. So ever since we've been here, giving these systems their 4 feedings that they've gotten, last one 15 days ago, today's feeding number 5, is going to get applied in the same fashion as we've been doing all along in here since we started, which was to put the food that we came down here with for them, cauliflower, strawberries, some coffee. We're just going to put it here in the box, which is where the fragments of the wool sweater had been placed, so that we don't lose track of them, or at least we can more easily find them to see how they're coming along. And last time over here in bin number 1, I believe we came to the conclusion that it had been probably a good couple check-ins since we last saw any sort of fragment of wool in here. So in bin number 1, we were already operating on the assumption that the experiment was more or less done. And I think we had consensus on that. Most people watching were kind of agreeing in the comments, you know. A lot of people were saying, yeah, experiment seems to be done, or at least that's kind of how I remember it. I really didn't make too much of a point out of trying to get feedback about whether or not the viewers agreed that it was perhaps time to call it in bin number 1, but that did seem to be the theme of anyone who did respond, suggesting that perhaps the experiment has actually run its course here in bin number 1, where the worms do appear to have eaten all of the wool fabric that they were given. The only thing that remained of the wool sweater was this one piece of thread, which was presumably some sort of a synthetic material, resulting in it not getting broken down by the worms. Some sort of material that the worms are incapable of consuming. But we left that thread in here. And in bin number 2, we found the same thread, except here in bin number 1, the thread still has that label, the neck, the care instructions that are in your garment. Pretty much all garments have a little label. Well, the label remained still, because bin number 1 was where the piece of the sweater came over that had the label. And even last time, we went through an entire check on this box in bin number 1 to see how things look, and we never stumbled on the thread. We actually had to come back and do a targeted search for it, and here I am once again having no luck finding this really long piece of thread which should actually just get caught on my finger at some point as I rummage through the material. But then again, here it is. Perhaps it wasn't so easy to snag because it was kind of jumbled up upon itself. But here's the care label, and here's the thread, off of which I believe the last fragments of fabric had already dropped off a few check-ins ago. So into here is where we're going to place today's feeding, I think, just to continue on, because what I thought I would do was not make the call here on my own. I would just kind of turn to you guys as the viewers to say, what do you guys think? Do you think we're done here? Have we actually seen the end of the fabric experiment after 277 days with the European night crawlers? It was so interesting up until maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, or maybe it was longer at this point. It's hard to remember. But for the longest time, there seemed to be virtually no progress on this experiment. It was already at the point where I was starting to question whether I would even want to continue. I definitely entertained the idea, I think on numerous occasions, of just calling it off and extracting whatever I could of the wool, even though it did seem like perhaps some of it was getting consumed. It certainly seemed like it was not happening at a pace that was, easily perceived by humans, kind of like glacier scale timing of things. Weeks and weeks go by, you see no signs of any evidence, and then at some point it just seemed like things started to kick in. So I've spread the thread out a little bit better to make it a lot easier to bump into next time, just running our fingers through. And like I said before, we've been I don't even know if I got that into it, but down here, what I did right there in terms of scraping just a little bit of material off the top, that's way more impact than anything we did last time. Last time all we did was remove the box and peek underneath, see what's going on, put the box back, and we didn't even disturb any of the stuff underneath the box. And I figured, hey, why don't we keep at it, Why don't we just keep at it? And before we get any further along, before we eventually get to the point where we're just going to want to cover up and start putting things away, I'm going to just come back in here with a little bit more of the mosquito dunks before I forget, because the flying insect situation still seems to be going on here. Perhaps not as severe as it had been previously, but still signs of flying insects, and our little friends are here now too. I can still see them. They're both still here, so we've not scared them away yet. So let's see if we can continue and complete this check-in and feeding in such a way that we don't scare away our helpers. But I'd like to turn to you guys now, as the viewers, to help me decide at this point, because I didn't want to do this on my own and just say, yep, I'm deciding on what happened here and come to the conclusion that the test should end. I think we should do so jointly, like we do with so many other things here on my channel. So I'm going to ask everyone that's watching, please. Some of you have been here for a long time and have been following the wool composting saga here on my channel, and others might be just chiming in for the first time. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, whether you've been here for a while or not. Do you agree that perhaps this test is over? I believe it was in bin number 2 that we felt like we had seen somewhat larger fragments. Perhaps, I don't even know how big of a fragment we might have seen, perhaps half the size of my pinky. And that might have been the last of it. Even if there were other pieces of it floating around in here, it was kind of the assumption that it wasn't going to last. at the pace that things were changing at. I mean, going from an entire garment down to nothing you could really pick up, and it was probably fair to assume that there were probably still fragments of it here and there in places, but none of it holding together well enough to be able to be pointed at and looked at and held in your hand to say, yep, that's definitely still a piece of wool. I think we've passed that stage at this point, but I guess if you want to get real technical, some people might say, yeah, there's definitely still wool in there, let's give it another week and then we'll call it off. Or perhaps what I'm really thinking is most people are probably going to tend to think that, yeah, you know, this experiment's history. Put it into the books as a done deal, and consider 277 days today as the time it took to get a nice wool fabric, a nice wool sweater, totally broken down with the help of these 2 bins of European nightcrawler worms. So please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you say. So I'm going to include a little bit of my grit over here, down here in the feeding box. And I guess if some of the feedback I get in the comments suggests that we should probably continue one more round, well, guess what? We're still pretty much configured as is. And then I think it's really just going to be a toss-up. Do we agree that today, at day 277, the experiment has concluded, or do we just go maybe one more cycle? And then I think at the next cycle, we're definitely going to consider this as a done deal. We'll extract the pieces of thread, which we know won't break down. We'll empty the boxes and extract them and get back to tending to these systems as regular worm bins. What do you think? Is that a good idea? I hope you agree. Let's do it that way if you do agree. And look at that. We've kind of gotten to the end of this check-in here. We've, you know, checked out how the experiment's progressing, pulled out the synthetic thread, but found no fragments of actual wool fabric. We've kind of put the topic out there for the crowd to, oh, did I scare that guy away? I put a pretty good shaking onto his home, and oh my goodness, look at all these flying insects. It's really just a matter of figuring out where the heck they're hiding out, and it seems to be within the bags in both cases. Yay. Well, maybe I've got to come up with some other sort of covering solution here to limit the number of places that these worms have, that these flying insects have to hide. And I mean, to that extent, I was kind of trying to keep these pieces of cardboard with these worms, since it sort of was part of their property when they lived in their old homes. I don't even remember what function these pieces of cardboard served anymore, but for some reason they've been sticking around with these little guys. But just in case this is what the worms are drawn to in terms of, I keep calling them worms. In case this is where the flying insects are hiding, I think I'm just going to exclude this, and maybe we'll get back to using it in some way in the future, but at this point I'm wondering if that might be where the flying insects are hiding, and if it is, then let's get it out of here. And well, I definitely see our little friend over here, probably not too happy about that last little jolt I gave his web. And oh my goodness, where'd this guy go? Did I scare him off? Oh man. Well, that was not my intention. My hope was that we would have these little helpers remain in both systems, continuing to help with the ongoing struggle to make these systems insect free, but well, I guess maybe we'll come back. Hopefully it'll come back. Let's keep our fingers crossed. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now. False alarm, false alarm. Looks like our bin number 1 guardian has returned to keep watch over our worm bin. Yay! Welcome back. All right, everyone, thanks again for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.